Today's guest is Phyllis Leavitt, and I'd like to share a little bit about her. She has graduated from Antioch University with a master's degree in psychology and counseling. And she also co-directed a sexual abuse treatment program called Parents United in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And she had a small private practice before becoming full-time. She has been a psychotherapist treating children, families, couples, and individual adults for 32 years, and has worked extensively with abuse and dysfunctional family dynamics, their aftermath, and some of the most important elements for healing, which is beautiful. She's also published 2 books, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire, and she's working on a third about bringing America to therapy. And she's going to talk a little bit more about that with us today. So welcome, Phyllis.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So something that she shared about LivGreater is she says she really tries to practice what she preaches. And I love that. She says, as a therapist, in creating great human relations in her own life and sharing what she's learned with others, including being imperfect herself. And so she's overcome many difficult things in her life, and she's learned to listen to her deepest self and higher being. And so do you have anything that you can share right off the bat about that? How has that come to play, or any history behind that?
Yeah, I mean, basically where I came from was, what appeared to be sort of a normal family on a normal suburban street in New Jersey. And and I was kind of a mystery to myself my whole, for a lot of my life up until probably in my 40s. I felt like I had kind of a dark cloud over me and I didn't know what it was. And so just to sort of weave in some threads, I always wanted to be a writer. Ever since I can remember, I wanted to be a writer. So maybe I was born with that, I don't know. And I started writing poetry when I was a teenager, and that was sort of my lifeline. It really connected me to my deepest self. And back in those days, nobody talked about your deepest self. That wasn't common language when I was growing up. So I didn't even know what that was. I just knew it felt good to write, and I knew I felt more alive when I did. And I also had periodically, I would have these amazing connections to like a feeling of divine love, or a deep connection to nature that felt like otherworldly to me. And they were very sporadic, those experiences. But for the most part, I kind of lived in really, like what I said, like under a dark cloud, and felt very alone, very sort of like a misfit, flawed, unlovable, all those things. And, long story short, what I finally began to realize, and some of this actually came through writing, I kept lots of journals, and I would just like talk about my feelings and talk about my whatever. And someone once suggested to me this writing practice called, just sort of sit down and you write as if your highest self is speaking to you. And I began to do that. And part of what unfolded, and I guess I was probably in my 30s when this happened. And by that time I was married and I had 3 kids, and I was in a pretty unhappy marriage. What came to me is something happened to me. And the long story short of that is I uncovered being abused myself as at different times in my childhood, and they were very deeply buried memories. And so there was sort of a contrast. And I think many people might experience this. There was sort of like this beautiful connection to spirit that would happen occasionally, and then sort of going down into the depths of darkness. And it was almost sort of, in hindsight, it didn't really feel this way at the time, but in hindsight, it's sort of like my connection to spirit kept me going. And I ended up joining some spiritual groups and doing some spiritual practices. And then at a certain point, and this was, let's see, it was in the 80s, and people were starting to talk about therapy. Nobody talked about psychotherapy when I was growing up. And in fact, there was sort of a stigma around it, like, you don't go to therapy because it means there's something wrong with you. But some of the people that I knew at the time started to go to therapy, and I did. And that was a big doorway for me. It was the first time that I had the understanding that our childhood has everything to do with how we feel and how we cope and what we believe about ourselves and about other people as we grow up.
Hmm.
And I started not to be such a mystery to myself, and I began to uncover what happened to me. Um,
Journaling is powerful, and
Very.
putting those words, it's a therapy. I mean, just a physical connection between the words you're putting on the paper and your deeper self. And I think that's beautiful that you had the opportunity, and it really helped you see the negative around you and be able to probably correct it and get, correct the trauma that you had had, or work on that, and be able to see it in a different way.
Absolutely. I mean, it really was my connection, and I had no idea where it was going to lead. And that's the part I was going to share with you next.
Hmm.
So what happened for me was I was deep in therapy, and I was uncovering memories. I had three little kids, um, and in the middle of that, I left my husband. I became a therapist. I was doing all this, it was intense. Let me just say it that way. It was
Yeah, it
really,
sounds like, as a mother and then going through divorce. I mean, all that coming together and all those
yeah,
emotions and trauma coming up to the surface. That would be a lot.
yeah, it was a lot. And, getting a divorce was actually part of it. Like, the trauma coming to the surface is what enabled me to to leave my husband, because it was like, no more of this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done with bad dynamics around me. And, but it was still also traumatic to do that and be a single mother and working and going to graduate school and, starting a practice and all of those things. But anyway, the long story short is, I kept a journal constantly because it was really my lifeline. Um, I've told this story many times, but I'll tell it again. So at the very darkest moment where I just was, had a hard time sleeping, and I was having massive anxiety, because so much pain was coming to the surface to be released. One day I was writing in my journal, and I said, God, I give up. I'm not getting better. I don't know what to do. And at that moment, literally, a divine voice started talking to me as I wrote in my journal. It really was my higher self. It really was a higher consciousness talking to me. And I know I always say this because it sounds so fantastical in a way. It's sort of like the story that would happen to somebody else, but never to me.
Mm-hmm. All
But
right.
it happened to me. And it really was another consciousness speaking to me and telling me about what my soul was doing in the experiences of Phyllis, and what I had taken on, and what the purpose was, and how to work with it from a very different perspective than psychological. And I don't want to say that the psychological isn't important, because it really is, and it really was for me. But for some reason, my path took me to something also in conjunction with that, which was a more spiritual approach or perspective on what I was working with. And I was taught many meditations and how to work with chakras. Um, and and everything that I was told really applied to me, but the messages were that these messages apply to humanity and what's going on the earth. And that's really where my other two books came from. They are the A Light in the Darkness is the beginning of that journey. The first part of it's autobiographical and what led up to this experience, and then the beginning of those messages. And Into the Fire is the continuation of the messages that I got from what I call a divine source. And I believe it's not my consciousness.
Right.
And it's powerful and beautiful and loving and non-judgmental and illuminating is what I would say about it. Um, and so one of the ways that my worlds came together, the psychological world and the spiritual world came together, is that I realized, and I had the experience, that going deep down into buried memories of what happened to me in this life opened up memories of a divine connection, memories of other lifetimes. Um, and it all became like one fabric, if that
Wow.
makes sense.
Yes. That's amazing.
It has been amazing, and I have more books to write on of what those messages are. Like, I haven't written yet about all that I learned about the chakras and how to work with them, which is another book I want to write. But in the meantime, um,
When did you come into like the chakras and all that? Did that
early
just
on,
okay.
early on, and I can tell you a little bit about it because it's so fascinating, and I have worked with some other people with what I learned, although I tended to stick with my psychotherapy practice and not mix those worlds. Um, but what I was told was that we each have three main chakras that we're working with. We're working with all of them all the time. Everybody has all the chakras and they're all at play. But we have something called a soul triangle. And the soul triangle is three chakras that are, one of them is a chakra of intention, one is a chakra of force, and one is manifestation. And it's complicated, so I don't want to confuse anyone, but I'll tell you how it played out for me.
Hmm.
Um, and that is what I was told is that the chakra of intention is the same for every human being, and it's the heart. And so the intention of all our incarnations is ultimately to be a vehicle to manifest divine love for ourselves and one another. And that's the purpose of all human incarnation ultimately. And we're obviously on a long road to get there. Um,
Yeah, it's a practice in itself, just to bring back to center, right? To
right,
find your heart. So the
right.
heart is the center. Yeah.
The heart is the center, and the heart is, heart is where we came from and heart is where we're going, kind of.
Hmm.
um, and then the chakra of force is just the big energies that you've been dealing with in your life. Like for me it was the first chakra, so lots of energies of destruction and creation, and that certainly made sense with the even with the present life that I've had. um, and the chakra of manifestation is how your soul ultimately wants to manifest like we each have a part in the play. Like I'm going to manifest love in a way that's unique to me, and you're going to manifest it in a way that's unique to you. But it's sort of guided by this configuration of energies, and for me it was the throat, and I was just told all this. And so my ultimate purpose was to speak and to connect with other people through my voice. And that was scary for me. Like it was not scary for me in the one-on-one as a psychotherapist.
Hmm.
One-on-one is great. I'm very comfortable in a one-on-one, but having a larger voice with a larger audience was really scary for me. And yet the messages I got were, you need to share this with other people. So that put me up against a whole array of challenges, but I had that path as a guidance from my heart. Move heart energy, move love through all the destructive energies into something creative, and speak. And that just sort of became a guidance for me. And we each have a soul triangle is what I was told, and we can each, and I've worked with some people about figuring out what theirs was. And
Does that soul triangle, is that kind of like just your purpose in life?
yeah,
So,
it's sort of like it's two things. It's where your gifts lie. It's sort of like what the way it was described to me is on an ego level where we, meet our challenges or our blocks, or we, feel lost or whatever. That energy is contained in the soul triangle, and as it gets lit up, as we, incorporate more soul energy into our being, or more love from our heart, or however you explain it to yourself, that the blocks get released and our gifts begin to manifest. So for me, like I kind of knew that I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't really want to share it with anyone, like, right?
well, it was
So
personal. The journaling was personal to you.
yeah,
So
yeah, and it was scary to me. And sometimes it still is. sometimes it still is. But I think I've done so much work on it over the years that I know this is where my soul is taking me. And so, I've learned again, and I always say imperfectly, because imperfectly is sort of the human part of it,
Hmm.
um, to keep speaking. Even, sometimes I'm really received and people are excited about what I'm saying. And sometimes I've gotten a lot of like, who do you think you are, to say that
Hmm.
you heard something divine. And I know that that goes with the territory, that so the soul
I,
triangle, go ahead, go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I think that goes for anyone. You
Right.
attract who you're to be around and how you are.
Right. And the people who are the naysayers are part of the path, because
Hmm.
it strengthens us to
Right.
hold on to our own integrity or center or soul or purpose. And there's been times where I retreated completely from having a negative reaction, and then I've really come back to it now. And the latest big guidance that I got was to write the book that I'm writing now, and that really came from guidance. So I had the idea for this book many years ago, and I never wrote it. I kind of took some notes along the way, and then I just kind of got to a place of confusion. I don't know if I should write the third book in my series or I should write this book. And then one day, literally, I had one of those moments. It was such a beautiful moment where that I call it grace, where I just felt flooded with divine love. It's something so big and so beautiful, so beyond the personal.
Hmm.
And in that moment, I was told to write this book. And I listened,
That's good.
because it's sort of undeniable, right?
Yeah.
So what this book is much more psychologically oriented. In fact, it is psychologically oriented. And so it
Okay.
came out of my own recognition from the abuse that I suffered and that I worked with in myself. I realized that I wasn't alone by any means, that there are thousands and millions of people who have been hurt by other human beings, who have been a mystery to themselves. They don't know why they react the way they do, or why they're attracted to relationships that aren't good for them, or why they feel stuck in manifesting their true spirit or their creativity or the all the love that they have inside, which is all of what I felt.
Hmm.
Um, and once I understood what happened to me, I wasn't a mystery anymore. It's like really like puzzle pieces just snapped together. And um, and out of that aha, that I'm not alone, that there's millions of people who are a mystery to themselves and reacting and acting in ways that they don't feel control over
Right.
because they don't know where they're coming from and
Yeah.
they don't have help. And it isn't just sexual abuse or physical abuse, it's poverty, it's discrimination, it's the after effects of war, it's gender bias, or persecution of women or minorities. Um, that there are people all over the world who are traumatized, who aren't getting help, and they're reacting out of
Hmm.
that in ways that are not constructive for them and often not constructive for other people.
Right.
And so I wanted to take what I learned from myself and what I've seen, over and over again as a psychotherapist in my office, um, into the world. Like, I don't want us to be a mystery to ourselves. I
Hmm.
want I want us to help each other. I want everything that I've gotten, I want to share with other people. And then the next big aha, and this is really where the theme of my book came from, was our country. And really this is many countries all over the world, but I'm only talking about America because this is where I live and this is the country that I'm familiar with, and I really can't speak to other countries. But
Hmm.
I know this dynamic is happening all over the world, that as a that we are often, and I think very much now, suffering from abusive family dynamics on a national level, that many of the people leading our country are operating the same way that abusers operate in their families and having the same effect on millions of people that abusive adults have on their spouses and children. And I felt like I needed to write this because one of the big ahas that I had in that is there's so much like partisan divide, and there's like, a mass shooting every other day. The escalation of hatred and violence and divisiveness and, blaming other people is so intense right now.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens in abusive families, with the same effects that the people who protest, even peacefully, are silenced or brutalized. They're discredited. People are blamed for the symptoms they have of abuse. So, our economic structure keeps many people in poverty, and then they're called lazy and entitled. The list goes on, and I don't
Right.
want to do a huge political rant. What I want to say is that this is sort of the terror of the situation, because if it doesn't stop, it's just going to escalate exactly the way, if abusive families don't get help, they tend to produce children and people who are either, overwhelmed and helpless, or become identified with the aggressor and become abusers themselves. And this is a tidal wave that I want to see addressed in our country.
Yeah.
Does
I
that
think,
make sense
like,
to you?
yes, that does make sense. And I think what you're saying earlier about you want to get it out there. And I think that is the purpose for all of us to be here to help one another on this
Right,
earth, right? We're here to
right.
serve one another. And it's a lot of that's taken away right now. People are more into themselves, or,
Yeah,
maybe not even gratifying themselves, but just wanting to understand themselves and not understanding how to just put it out there to serve and help one another. Just like you're saying, from ways they've been taught through
right,
family or their
right.
environment or whatever. And I think that's just escalated, where we have a lot of that darkness in the United States
Yeah,
now. And there's also a lot of good. I feel that there is, there's counterbalance of everything. There's good and evil, and I think there's a lot of light going on as well, which is is good to see. Good to see. And what you're doing will help, bring out more light, right?
right.
To uncover
And
that
what and
darkness.
and what you're doing, because you're giving voice to so many different people who have something to share about what works, and we all need that. So, I really honor what you're doing, and I think
Thank you.
this whole medium of the internet, this is one way that I think the internet really serves, because you can reach so many people in so many places.
Yeah.
And what I want to say is, in my book, I really try to give that counterbalance between the light and the dark. It isn't all dark. And the light part is exactly what you said. There are so many good people in this country and in the world. There's so many people. One of the things that, I had to do some research for different things that I was writing about in my book. And one of the things that came up in my research was a study that had been done of volunteerism in America. And it's really high.
That's
It's
good.
a very high percentage of people who give their time to help others for free.
Hmm.
And that was so encouraging. And I wish that could be on the nightly news,
Right.
I wish that could be the food we eat,
Yeah.
instead of such a steady diet of the dark or the violence. And yes, I know we need to know what's going on for sure,
Hmm.
but there is so much good. And then the other part that I really try to emphasize in my book, it's like, sort of like the second half of the book is, and this is why I'm writing the book from the perspective of a psychotherapist, is that we know so much in the world of psychotherapy about how to treat abuse. We know how to treat people who have been abused, so that there's a good chance they won't repeat the cycle themselves. We know how to address abuse in families. Um, and we know so much about, there's so much possibility and we're not using all of what we know to help repair. For me, the focus is on repair. It's not on winning the argument. It's
Right.
on, does that make sense?
Yes.
Because when and family therapy is a great model for this. And the reason why it's such a great model is because when you are working with a family, you're not trying to have one person win the argument. You're trying for the family to come back together. You're,
Right.
you're trying to repair the injuries that have been done between people so that the love can surface, so that the cooperation can surface, so that everybody feels valued and everybody has a voice.
Yeah.
And that those are like underlying tenets of good therapy. Even if you're working with an individual, you're still working with that. But with a family, it's pretty obvious. And so for me, that's what I want to see happen in the family of America. You know, I want to see there be like a mediator in Congress, help people talk to each other instead of, solidify into hostile, divisive positions. Does that make
Well,
sense?
yes, it does. And it to me, it makes me ask, why do they need that? I mean, they're adults. They used to not be acting like that. They used to be
I know.
and now they just kind of let their natural self come out, I guess.
Mhm.
The natural man, and not controlling their actions, which it's sad. I mean, to have that happening in our Congress.
It's very sad, and it's a terrible role model for our children.
Hmm.
It's a and I have the same question, why do we need that? But that's part of what I'm trying to answer, at least, nobody has all the answers, but I'm just trying to answer some of these questions from the point of view of my experience as a psychotherapist. And that is that I think the reason why we have this is because abuse dynamics have taken over. These are the behaviors of abusive people or people who have been mistreated. And one of the big outcomes that I was mentioning earlier is identifying with the aggressor. That's an outcome of mistreatment.
Hmm.
And we have a lot of people in power now who have identified with the aggressor. And that's where they feel their power lies. And a big part of my book, which is which is part of what I don't think is common knowledge, is when you look at abuse family dynamics and you look at those two main outcomes, and certainly not everybody fits one picture or the other,
Right.
but the general gist is you become powerless, which is kind of what I did, or you become aggressive without any intervention. And sometimes you become both. Um, but let's just say you have a family with a very abusive adult or adults,
Hmm.
and you have some kids that turn out very helpless and some that, become bullies, which is not uncommon. Um, the bully is also a victim of abuse.
Right.
And in the best psychotherapy, that's what we treat. That we're not looking to punish people, we're looking to help them heal. So whether it's someone who has allowed other people, because of their own helplessness and feelings like they can't defend themselves, they've allowed other people to continue to hurt them, or they've just continued to be hurt. I don't mean that in a blaming way.
Hmm.
Or they've become the bully and they're an aggressor toward other people. They're all victims. And
Yeah.
we have to see that even in the worst acting out in our country. And I think that's a really hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, because we want to make people bad and wrong and punish them.
Hmm. That
Does that
reminds
make
me of
sense?
a yeah. That reminds me of a video my girls were just watching the other day. It was a cartoon type video, and this boy on the bus was, these were like elementary age children. He was swearing at this girl to try and offend her in some, get her to
Right,
riled up and react.
right.
And she just asked him to stop, and he wouldn't. And so she told her mom, and she's like, well, what can you do? And so she went on the bus the next time they showed, and she had headphones in. She was just listening to music, so she couldn't hear this young man. And he just was saying, oh, well, how about this? I'm going to try this one, and it wasn't working. And then he was saying it, and all of a sudden all the kids in the bus were staring at him like, what are you saying? These are not good words. And he got down in his seat and was, hiding in his seat. And she came over, the little girl, and said, do you want to listen? and
Oh,
and gave him an earbud. And at first he's like, no, and then he took it, and then he's just that overcoming the what really might be happening in that person's life. It doesn't say why that boy was acting that way. I'm sure there
right.
was something affecting him behind the scenes, but
Something.
Yeah,
Right.
but to reach out and just be compassionate to those, that revile you, as it says.
That is such a beautiful story, and that is such a good example of what I'm talking about. There are people that we don't know how to treat. There are people that, are really a danger to society. And maybe someday we'll know how to treat even, people who are that severely damaged. But there are so many more people that are treatable,
Yes.
like that little boy. And look at that intervention. What a beautiful story of someone not grabbing the bait, but coming from their heart and, not accepting the abusive language or whatever it was he was doing, and then being able to reach out. To me, this is what is going to actually save our world.
Yeah,
And
just
that's
to,
why I'm writing the book. Yeah.
that's
Um,
beautiful.
and it really does involve a huge paradigm shift. One of the things that I learned in graduate school, I remember I was in a class on couples therapy, and one of the things that the instructor said was, um, the couples who do best are the ones who don't engage in a power struggle, but they really just look to see what their part is in what's going on, and they correct that.
Mm.
And I think that's a huge paradigm shift from I'm going to make you know that you're wrong and I'm right.
Hmm.
I'm going to beat you at this game. And I think to a large extent, not only in the workings of our country, but our country in relationship to the world, and many countries in relationship to each other, or races in relationship to each other, or religions in relationship to each other, we're still trying to conquer, instead of, how can we do what the little girl on the bus did,
Right.
and because and I say this all the time, because we all are wired for love and connection. We know this, it's a science. It's not just an emotional response to being a human being. We're wired for love and connection. I have
Hmm.
never met one person in my practice or in my life, in my personal life, who didn't want more love, more connection, more fulfillment. People don't want more violence
Right.
and more hatred and more divisiveness in their own lives. And it's a sign of how the mental health in our country has deteriorated, that we condone that in national politics or national policy, that there's this huge disconnect between what we want for ourselves and what we tolerate our leadership to do. That is a mental health issue,
Yeah.
not a
Totally.
political issue. It's not an
Right.
ideological issue, but we've been told it is.
Yeah. Little by little. And I think most of all, people just don't know what to do about that or how to handle it.
Right,
How can I correct that?
right.
It's way up there on the hill kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things I talk about, and there's no easy answer. I mean, it's going to require a lot of work for us
Hmm.
to do this, but I
Yeah.
I kind of talk about it in terms of from the bottom up and the top down.
Hmm.
So, the more we each embrace what that little girl did on the bus in our own lives, the more we strengthen the bottom up, and
Right.
we produce more people who are going to vote for people who embody those values. And then hopefully there's some feedback loop to the top down, whether it's through elections or grassroots movements, or, um, the challenge of climate change, or whatever it is, that we can influence from both sides.
And I think that's it. That no voting locally, knowing locally where the government is in your local area, your small
Yeah,
town, your big city, whatever it is, and to be involved and vote and know who you're voting for, not just vote to be voting, but really
right.
know who you're voting for.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I think there really is hope for us, just like there's hope for an individual or an individual family. And like you said, a lot of people don't know what to do. And that's one, and I see that in my practice. One of the things that I've shared before is that, in all the years that I've been a psychotherapist, nobody came to their session talking about politics until the 2016 election.
Hmm.
And then I had people traumatized by what was going on in the campaign and in the election and in the aftermath. Traumatized, sleepless, scared, feeling helpless, powerless, not knowing what to do. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book, because we can do what that little girl did. And
Mhm.
some people, that's our sphere of influence. It's our families, it's our workplace, it's our friends. And some people have a huge sphere of influence.
Yeah.
Um, and we can all play a part.
Well, Phyllis, I appreciate all that you've shared. This is amazing. And can you share where people can find more about you and your books?
Yeah, I have a website. It's www.phyllisleavitt.com. And on that, I'm kind of announcing my new book. It's not out yet, but the new
Okay.
book is going to be called America in Therapy. And the other two books, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire, are on my website. You can purchase them from there, or you can just look in them, and there's some free samples of chapters of both of those books on my website. And if you there's a little sign in place on the homepage. If you put in your email and contact information, you can get those free chapters. You can be on my mailing list, and then I can let you know when my new book comes out. I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn. You and definitely, friend me there or contact me there, and on Instagram. So those are the places you can find me. And I'd love to connect with anyone who wants to connect with me. And you can certainly reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we will have all that information in the show notes, all your links and stuff as well. So people can
Perfect.
go there and connect with you. So